Snow fell over Chicago in heavy white sheets that night, the kind of storm that erased the lines of streets and turned every familiar corner into something strange. Most flights had been canceled. Trains were delayed. Cabs crawled along salted avenues with their wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm. In the middle of all that white chaos, the Caldwell-crowned Chicago stood like a fortress of warm gold light, its tall glass facade glowing against the darkness, its red awning stretched proudly above the polished marble entrance. Inside the lobby, the air was warm and faintly perfumed with cedar and bergamot. Crystal chandeliers cast soft amber light onto velvet sofas and onto the long mahogany reception desk, where uniformed staff stood with practiced smiles. Wealthy travelers passed through with their leather luggage and tailored coats, complaining quietly about the storm. The hotel was almost fully booked, but the staff managed the chaos with practiced calm. That warmth, however, was only on the surface. Beneath the gold light and the soft music, the lobby carried a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the chill of a place that had begun to confuse luxury with kindness and presentation with care. It was into this lobby that an old woman walked, slow and unsteady, her woolen coat dark with melted snow at the shoulders, and her shoes leaving small wet marks on the marble floor. She carried a faded canvas bag in one hand and a thin scarf in the other. Her hair, white and pinned into a simple knot, had loosened in the wind, and her cheeks were red from the cold. Her name was Adelaide Caldwell, and she was 74 years old. She walked to the reception desk and rested her hand gently on the marble. Her voice was soft but clear. She told the young clerk that she had a reservation under her name, that her wallet had slipped out somewhere in the back of a taxi half an hour earlier, and that her phone had died before she could call to recover it. She asked, very politely, if the clerk might help her by checking the booking under her name and date of birth, or perhaps offering her a moment to charge the phone. The clerk hesitated. She was new, only weeks into the job, and she was already looking at her supervisor for guidance. Before she could open her screen, Corbin Drake appeared at her elbow, smooth and unhurried, his dark blazer crisp, his pale tie perfectly straight. He was the night manager, 43 years old, with the kind of face that smiled easily at the right people, and hardened just as easily at the wrong ones. He looked Adelaide over from her wet coat to her worn boots, and in less than 2 seconds he had decided what kind of guest she was. He stepped in front of the clerk and said, in a voice low enough to seem polite but loud enough for the marble to carry, that the hotel could not accept guests without identification or a verified card on file. Adelaide kept her composure. She told him her full name twice, slowly, and offered her date of birth. She suggested that if he allowed her to charge her phone for only a few minutes, she could call her family and have everything resolved. She was not asking for charity. She was asking for time. Corbin tightened his lips. He did not check the system. He did not even glance at the clerk's screen. Instead, he leaned slightly forward and said, in that same careful voice, that the Caldwell Crown was a 5-star hotel, not a public shelter for the storm. Several guests turned at the sound. A woman in a fur coat stopped mid-step. A young businessman by the elevator lifted his phone and began to record, not out of concern but out of curiosity. The lobby grew quiet around the desk, the hush spreading like a small ring of cold water. Outside, the wind picked up, and the revolving door turned again. A man stepped through with a small girl tucked against his hip, dragging a battered nylon suitcase that had clearly traveled too many miles. His name was Oliver Bennett. He was 29 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean strength of someone who had spent his working years climbing ladders and crawling through utility shafts. His dark brown hair was cut short and damp with melted snow. He wore a black canvas coat that was clean but worn at the cuffs, a white shirt slightly creased from 6 hours behind the wheel, and dark pants over scuffed leather boots. In his arms, his daughter Matilda watched the lobby with tired eyes. She was 6 years old, small for her age, with light brown hair held back in a loose ponytail and a soft pink scarf wound twice around her neck. She held her stuffed rabbit close, the gray fur worn flat at the ears from years of being clutched in small hands. Matilda had asthma, and the long drive from a small town in Indiana to a Chicago specialist had left her pale and short of breath. The appointment was the next morning. Oliver eased Matilda down onto her own feet and gently held her hand. He started toward the desk with no intention beyond claiming his key and getting his daughter into a warm bed. Then he saw the old woman, and the words at the desk reached him in fragments. He slowed. He had a sick child against his side and a tight budget in his pocket, and he had learned long ago that strangers' troubles could swallow whole evenings. He almost looked away. He almost kept walking. But Matilda was already watching. She had seen the wet coat, the trembling hand on the canvas bag, the small puddle gathering near the old woman's boots. Her tired eyes went up to her father, and she pulled gently at the sleeve of his coat. "Daddy," she whispered, "doesn't she have anyone helping her?" Oliver looked down. Her question struck him in the same place his own mother's voice had once lived. His mother had taught him that a kind person was simply a person who noticed when someone else was cold. He had passed that lesson to Matilda in the same plain words. Matilda spoke again, quieter this time, almost to herself. "What if that was Grandma?" Oliver felt the question settle inside him like a small stone falling to the bottom of a deep glass. He understood that if he kept walking, his daughter would learn something that night, and what she would learn was that grown men quietly walked past pain when it was someone else's. He set the suitcase down carefully. He squeezed Matilda's hand once and crouched to her level. "Stay close to me," he said softly. Then he stood up and walked toward the desk. Before Oliver could reach the marble, Corbin made the situation worse. He took half a step around the desk and asked Adelaide, with a smile that was almost an insult, to step away from the reception area entirely. He said the hotel could not allow loitering in the main lobby. When Adelaide repeated calmly that her booking was under the name A.A. Caldwell and asked only that the system be checked, Corbin's smile thinned into something colder. "Caldwell," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "That is a rather large name to borrow, ma'am." A small ripple of laughter moved through the people closest to the desk. The woman in the fur coat whispered to her husband that scammers got bolder by the year. Even those who had earlier looked sympathetic now turned aside, embarrassed for everyone but themselves. Adelaide did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at the people around her, slowly, with eyes that had carried too many decisions for too many years to be shaken by a stranger's smirk. There was no panic in her face. There was sadness. And there was something else, quieter, but heavier, the look of a woman who had built a thing she loved and was watching it forget itself. She had founded the Caldwell Crown brand on a simple promise. She had said that a hotel was a place where strangers far from home could feel for one night that someone cared whether they slept warmly or not. That promise had carried the brand from a single quiet inn to a chain of luxury properties on 3 coasts. And now, in the heart of her flagship lobby, she was watching that promise dissolve under the weight of a manager's small ego. Corbin made a quiet gesture toward the security guard near the front entrance. He did not lower his voice. He told Adelaide that if she did not exit the property in the next minute, he would treat her presence as a disturbance. Adelaide tilted her head slightly. "Are you really planning to push a 74-year-old woman out into a snowstorm?" she asked, and her voice was so calm that it made the question more terrible. "I am planning," Corbin replied, "to protect the hotel from unnecessary risk." That sentence reached Oliver as he closed the last few feet to the desk. Something in him went very still and very steady. The risk in the room was not an old woman in a wet coat. The risk in the room was a child watching grown men decide who deserved warmth. Oliver stopped beside Adelaide, careful not to crowd her, and he kept his voice low and even. He told Corbin that the hotel could simply check the booking under her name. He suggested that Adelaide could wait in the lobby's seating area while staff helped her contact a family member. He spoke the way he had once spoken to a building owner about a faulty boiler, plainly, with the calm of a man who had seen complicated systems most of his life. Corbin's eyes moved from Oliver's plain coat to his worn boots to the tired child standing a few feet behind him. "And you are?" he asked. "A guest," Oliver said. "A guest with a reservation here." "Yes." "Well then, sir, I would advise you to focus on your own arrangements. This is not your concern." Oliver glanced at the wide windows where the snow was now blowing sideways. Then he looked back at Corbin. "When you start talking about pushing an elderly woman out into that," he said, nodding at the glass, "it becomes the concern of anyone in this lobby with a working conscience." A few guests went very still. Corbin told Oliver that the hotel had policies, that a 5-star property could not allow unverified persons to linger in its lobby, that if every traveler with a sad story were granted exception, there would be no order at all. "I am not asking you to break a policy," Oliver said. "I'm asking you to remember that a good policy always leaves room for a human being." Corbin considered him for a long moment, then offered a small, condescending smile. "And I suppose you intend to vouch for her?" Oliver looked at Matilda, who was still holding her rabbit. He took the key card from his coat pocket and laid it gently on the marble. "If she has no room," he said, "let her use mine. I will sign whatever paperwork you need." Adelaide turned her head slowly to look at him. For the first time that night, her composure cracked, not into shock but into something softer. She had not yet revealed who she was. She wanted to see, without the shield of her name, exactly how far this stranger would go. Corbin barked a short, dry laugh and told Oliver to put the cardboard hero act away. Oliver did not flinch. "I am not playing hero," he said quietly. "I am trying to make sure my daughter does not grow up thinking that silence is the same thing as good manners." Corbin's smile finally fell off his face. The small audience around the desk had grown larger now, and he could see his control of the moment slipping with every second Oliver spoke. He turned the screen of his terminal toward himself and made a show of typing. He told Oliver that the hotel reserved the right to cancel any reservation that was being used to obstruct staff. The threat was unmistakable. Oliver had paid for one night. Oliver had a sick child. Oliver had driven 6 hours through a storm. And Corbin, with 2 keystrokes, could send him back into that storm with nowhere to go. A few guests murmured. One woman, in heels that probably cost more than Oliver's car, said quite clearly that some travelers always tried to manufacture a scene to get an upgrade. A man near the elevator said, just loud enough for Matilda to hear, that poor people love to play the victim. Matilda lowered her face into her rabbit. Her shoulders curled inward in the way Oliver had seen too many times when other children's words had clipped at her in school. Oliver knelt down in front of her. He lifted her chin with one knuckle. You don't have to believe what strangers say about us, he told her. You only have to remember that we keep being kind, even when other people are not. She nodded against his palm. He stood again. He did not glare at the woman. He did not answer the man. He looked only at Corbin. If your hotel intends to cancel my room because I tried to keep an old woman out of the snow, he said, go ahead. But I would like the cancellation reason to be entered exactly as it happened. Please type the words. Guest reservation canceled because guest refused to allow management to remove an elderly woman from the lobby during a blizzard. The lobby fell completely silent. Corbin's hand hovered over the keyboard. He had heard, somewhere in the back of his mind, the small click of a recording phone. But pride is a stubborn thing, and humiliation is a worse one, and when those two collide, they rarely choose wisdom. He turned to the security guard. Escort them all away from the front desk, he said. The guard hesitated. He looked at Adelaide, then at Oliver. He took a slow step forward, but he did not put a hand on anyone. Oliver shifted his shoulder slightly so that Matilda was a half step behind him. It was the calm posture of a man whose body had learned that there are people you stand between and not beside. It was at that precise moment that the private elevator at the far end of the lobby chimed. The polished brass doors slid open, and 3 figures walked out, 2 assistants in tailored black, and between them, a woman who stopped the room before she had taken her 3rd step. Her name was Audrey Caldwell. She was 28 years old, dark-haired, with a kind of calm beauty that had appeared on the covers of business magazines as the face of a new generation of hotel leadership. She wore an ivory dress that fitted close to her figure, its neckline a clean V, the hem catching the light as she moved. Her hair fell soft over her shoulders. She had spent the last hour upstairs on the rooftop ballroom, giving a speech at the hotel's annual Children's Hospital benefit. She had spoken about responsible hospitality, about the warmth of the Caldwell Crown promise, about the way her grandmother had built the brand on a single belief that no traveler should feel invisible. Now she walked into a lobby in which a manager had a security guard standing beside a man holding the hand of a small frightened girl, and a wet old woman watching from 2 feet away. She stopped. The clerk straightened. Corbin pulled at the cuff of his blazer. "What is going on here?" Audrey asked. Corbin spoke first, fast and smooth. He told the story the way he wanted it told. An unverified woman had walked in claiming a reservation she could not prove. A male guest had inserted himself, attempting to manipulate hotel policy in front of the very important guests, still arriving from the rooftop event. He, Corbin, had been protecting hotel security and brand standards. Audrey's eyes moved from Adelaide to Oliver, to the small girl with the rabbit. Her first instinct, as the chief executive of a national hotel brand, was to defend the system she had built. She turned to Oliver. "Do you understand," she asked, in a measured professional voice, "how a public dispute in a fully booked lobby can damage the experience of every guest in this hotel?" Oliver did not look away from her. "Do you understand," he answered, just as evenly, "how pushing a 74-year-old woman into a blizzard could damage her ability to live to next week?" Audrey blinked once. She was used to being addressed with deference, with the careful softness that wealthy people reserved for one another. Oliver was not unkind. He was simply not afraid. He spoke to her the way one human being speaks to another, and that made her pause. She asked him to explain, from the beginning, what had happened. He told her. He spoke in short, exact sentences. He said the woman had walked in claiming a reservation, had lost her wallet in a cab, and her phone had died. He said she had asked only for a few minutes to charge her phone or for someone to verify the booking. He said the manager had not opened the system, had not asked the clerk to check the records, had instead suggested that she leave the property, and had threatened to involve security. He said the lobby had laughed. He said his daughter had asked him a question. He said he had offered his own room because the booking dispute was less important than the woman's safety. He did not say any of it as a complaint. He said it like a report. He simply finished, and stood, and waited. Corbin tried to interrupt, to talk about hotel procedure. Oliver turned his head only slightly. "I understand procedure," Oliver said. "I worked for years on the building maintenance side of large hotels. I know that security matters. But every good procedure I ever read had room in it for a human being." Audrey was quiet for a moment. The fact that he had worked in hospitality buildings registered with her in a small but important way. "What do you think we should have done?" she asked. Oliver answered without hesitation. He said the front desk could have placed the woman in the supervised waiting area near the concierge cameras. He said a staff member could have offered to make a phone call on her behalf. He said the system could have been searched first, and the dispute handled second. He said there were a dozen options before the only one chosen, which was to push an old woman back into a storm. Then he said the line that would stay with Audrey long after the night ended. "A hotel can have marble under the feet and crystal over the head," he said quietly. "But if there is no kindness at the front desk, it is only an expensive building pretending to be a luxury." The words landed exactly where they were meant to land. Audrey had said something almost identical, in different language, on the rooftop barely an hour earlier. She had said that the Caldwell Crown brand was not selling rooms, it was selling the feeling of being looked after. And here in her own lobby, an ordinary man was telling her, gently and without anger, that the hotel of her family's name was failing the very thing she had just promised. Adelaide watched her granddaughter's face. There was no triumph in her expression, only the patient sorrow of a woman waiting to see whether the next generation would understand without being told. She had not yet revealed her name. She wanted Audrey to feel the weight of the truth before she met it. Audrey turned slowly toward the older woman, and her voice softened despite herself. "May I ask your full name, ma'am?" Adelaide did not hesitate. "Adelaide Caldwell," she said. A small, careful silence rolled across the lobby. It was the kind of silence that began at the desk and traveled outward in widening rings, touching one set of ears at a time. Corbin's recovery was almost immediate. He laughed. A short, uncomfortable laugh, and shook his head. "Miss Caldwell," he said quickly to Audrey, with respect, "surnames are not unique." This woman is clearly attempting to leverage the family name for sympathy. But his voice had thinned. The ease that had carried him through the earlier confrontation was no longer there. Audrey looked at Adelaide more carefully now. She studied the line of the older woman's shoulders, the way her hands rested still over the canvas bag, the patient, unworried steadiness that did not match a person caught in a lie. Audrey's mind began to move ahead of her, picking up small details and refusing to set them down. Adelaide opened the canvas bag with slow, unhurried fingers. The lobby, almost without realizing, leaned closer. She did not pull out a passport. She did not pull out a credit card. She drew from the bag a small velvet box, dark green, its corners worn from age. She opened it, and inside lay a single brass key, polished to a deep gold, its shaft engraved in fine letters that even from a few feet away could be read by the people closest to her. "Founder's Master Key," the engraving said. "Adelaide Caldwell." Audrey's breath stopped for one long beat. She had seen that key before. It had sat for years inside a glass case in the executive boardroom of the Caldwell Crown headquarters. It was the key from the very first hotel her grandmother had opened. Half a century earlier, the symbolic key passed only to the person who held founding controlling ownership of the chain. It was not something that could be forged from a photograph. Adelaide set the key gently on the marble, and from the same bag drew a second item, a thin black metal card, plain on its face, except for a small, embossed crown. She held it out to the clerk. The clerk's hand shook as she took it. She slid it into the executive verification slot beneath the main reception screen. The system did not hesitate. White text appeared across the panel in silent, decisive letters. "Controlling owner verified. Adelaide Caldwell." The lobby did not move. Even the soft music from the overhead speakers seemed to pause between notes. The woman in the fur coat who had earlier muttered about scammers lowered her face. The man with the phone slipped the device into his pocket without finishing his recording. Corbin's color drained so quickly that Audrey, even in her own shock, noticed. Adelaide turned her eyes back to him. Her voice was very soft. "You did not refuse me because I had no room," she said. "You refused me because you decided I did not deserve to be treated kindly." Corbin's mouth opened, and what came out was a string of small, broken apologies. He said he had not recognized her. He said if he had known who she was, he would have handled the situation differently. He said his only intention had been to maintain hotel standards. Adelaide listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, very quietly, the one thing he had not braced for. "That is the problem," she said. "You only learn to be kind in the moment you realize the person in front of you had power." The lobby did not breathe. Audrey lowered her eyes for a moment, because the words had not been aimed only at Corbin. They had landed against the entire culture of the brand she ran. Adelaide spoke without raising her voice, and the room listened. She told them that for the past 6 months she had been receiving handwritten letters from guests across the country. An elderly widow in Denver denied a reservation she had held for 2 months because her credit card had been compromised after a hospital stay. A retired veteran in Boston asked to leave a Caldwell Crown lobby because he had sat too long waiting for his daughter's flight. A schoolteacher in Phoenix, dressed simply after a long bus ride, told quietly that the hotel was not the right fit for her. Each time Adelaide had asked for the internal report. Each time she had been told the matter had been handled according to procedure. So she had decided to walk through the front door of her own flagship without an assistant, without a town car, without a black card visible at the desk. She had wanted to know how her hotels treated a woman who could not, at first glance, prove her worth. The answer had unfolded in front of all of them. Corbin offered again that he had only been following safety standards. Adelaide shook her head once. "Standards do not require you to humiliate an elderly woman," she said. "Procedure does not require you to invite a lobby of strangers to laugh at someone who is cold. That was not policy. That was character." Audrey turned to her assistant and gave a single low instruction. Corbin was to be relieved of his shift immediately, his manager privileges suspended, and a formal review opened by both human resources and legal first thing in the morning. The assistant nodded and stepped away, but Adelaide reached out and rested her hand gently on Audrey's arm. "Do not only punish one man to save the brand," she said. "Find out why he believed he was allowed to act this way." Audrey closed her eyes for a brief second. The instruction landed inside her like a key turning in a lock. She knew that if she fired Corbin alone and called it a solution, she would be doing the same thing the corporate reports had been doing for months, choosing the easy face of a deeper problem. The deeper problem was that her hotels had begun to reward smooth presentation while quietly tolerating a contempt for guests who did not look the part. A few of the people who had laughed earlier now stepped away with their faces low. One older woman in pearls came forward as if to offer some sort of apology. Adelaide stopped her with a small, kind look. "Next time," Adelaide said, "do not wait to learn who someone is before you decide they deserve to be defended." The lobby slowly began to move again, one quiet step at a time. The security guard withdrew without being asked. The clerk wiped at her eyes with the cuff of her sleeve. Corbin allowed himself to be led toward a back office, his shoulders no longer straight. Audrey turned to Oliver. She did not begin with hotel language. She did not begin with brand language. She began with the only words that mattered. "I owe you an apology," she said. Oliver did not answer at once. He waited. "I doubted you," she continued. "I let my own staff frame you as a disturbance because that was the easier story. I am sorry for that, and I am sorrier still that my hotel made your daughter watch this." She knelt then, slowly, lowering herself in her ivory dress, until her face was level with Matilda's. Matilda watched her with cautious eyes. Audrey's voice softened in a way that none of her board members had ever heard before. "I am sorry, sweetheart," she said. "I am sorry that grown-ups behaved badly tonight in a place that should have made you feel safe." Matilda glanced up at her father. Oliver gave her a small nod. Matilda looked back at Audrey. "She just needed to sit down where it was warm," Matilda said simply. There was a stillness in the lobby after that. The grown-ups had spoken for many minutes about brand and procedure and verification and ownership. The child had stated in 8 words what every person in the room should have understood from the first second. Audrey rose. She turned to her assistants. She asked for the best available suite, fresh linens, a humidifier sent up immediately, hot soup, and warm milk for the child, tea for Adelaide, and a dedicated car arranged at 6 in the morning to deliver Oliver and Matilda to their hospital appointment. Oliver thanked her quietly. "I did not do this for an upgrade," he said. "I did it because I did not want my daughter to learn how to look the other way." Audrey held his gaze for a long beat. There was no flirtation in it. There was something quieter, something more important. It was the look of a powerful woman recognizing, perhaps for the first time in a long while, a kind of strength that had nothing to do with money. He had not bowed to her. He had not sought her favor. He had simply stood by an old woman in a wet coat in front of a lobby full of strangers. Adelaide watched the exchange and said nothing. She had simply lived long enough to know that a woman with everything could still be quietly stunned by a man who had nothing to offer her except his decency. Before Oliver and Matilda turned toward the elevator, Audrey asked whether there was anything else they needed. Oliver glanced at his daughter. "A humidifier, please," he said. "She has asthma. The dry air at night makes the cough worse." Audrey nodded, and the assistant moved at once. It was a small detail, but it confirmed for her something she had only sensed before. Even when offered a handful of luxuries, this man was thinking about his child first. The storm broke sometime in the night. By morning, the wind had quieted, the snow lay smooth and bright over the city, and the lobby of the Caldwell-Crown Chicago stood under a thin, pale light. The desk staff moved differently. There was a careful courtesy to their work now, not fearful, but more aware. Corbin was not at his post. In a small private dining room off the main lobby, Adelaide had arranged a quiet breakfast. She had invited Oliver, Matilda, and Audrey. Oliver hesitated at first, but Matilda had decided overnight that Adelaide was, in her words, the hotel grandma, and she wanted to sit beside her. The child carried her rabbit with her into the room. Over warm pancakes and a small dish of fresh fruit, Adelaide asked Oliver very plainly why he had been willing to give up his only room when his own child was sick. Oliver thought about it for a moment, then answered with the simplicity of someone who had not prepared the words ahead of time. "I thought about Matilda needing a stranger's help one day, somewhere far from home," he said. "I hoped someone would not look the other way. I cannot ask the world to be kind to her if I am not willing to be kind to someone else's grandmother first." Adelaide was quiet for a long second. Then she looked at Audrey. "In that lobby last night," she said, "there were many people with money. There were people with titles. There were people with very fine suites upstairs. The only person who acted like a leader was the man at this table." Audrey set down her cup. The words sat inside her with a weight she had not asked for, but she did not push them away. By mid-morning, she had called an emergency leadership meeting. From that meeting, she announced what would become known across the entire chain as the Warm Room Protocol. Every Caldwell-Crown property would now provide a supervised waiting area, with seating, blankets, water, and a charging station for any guest whose situation could not be immediately verified during a crisis. Elderly guests, parents with young children, travelers caught in extreme weather, persons who had lost wallets or phones, would be sat down, kept warm, and assisted in verification before any conversation about removal could even begin. No staff member could cite brand image as a reason to refuse a person dignity. She also announced an emergency assistance fund dedicated to guests caught in storms, medical events, or sudden travel disruptions. Old complaints that had been quietly closed would be reopened. Managers who had buried problems with the words "handled by procedure" would be reviewed individually. Adelaide proposed that Oliver be brought on as an independent guest experience advisor. Oliver was startled. He had no hospitality degree. He had no executive title. "We have plenty of people who can read reports," Audrey told him. "We need someone who still sees the human being behind the report." Oliver hesitated, because Matilda came first. Audrey offered a flexible arrangement, part-time, mostly travel-free, focused on touchpoint reviews and on training sessions where staff could hear, in his own words, what dignity at the front desk really looked like. He thought about it for a long moment, then said he would consider it. As Oliver and Matilda finally walked toward the front doors, the morning sun caught the marble and made it briefly bright. Matilda paused, holding her father's hand. "Daddy," she asked, "does Adelaide really own all the hotels?" Oliver smiled. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "But remember this. She deserved to be treated kindly before anyone knew that. Matilda nodded, holding her rabbit a little tighter. Behind the tall glass, Audrey stood watching them go. Her ivory dress had been replaced by a simple cream blouse, her hair pulled back. She did not look at Oliver as a guest who had once disrupted her lobby. She looked at him as the person who had reminded her of what her grandmother had built half a century earlier, and what she herself had almost forgotten. Adelaide stepped quietly to her side. "You see, dear," she said, very softly, "sometimes the person who saves a brand is not the most expensive consultant. It is the only one in the room with the courage to say the simple thing." Audrey did not answer. She watched the man and the small girl walk out into the bright snow, the child's pink scarf bobbing, the rabbit's gray ears bouncing softly against the curve of her arm. She let the moment finish without speaking. There would be other days for words. For now, she only stood at the glass and felt, very gently, the quiet beginning of something she could not yet name. That night, Oliver Bennett had thought he was only protecting an old woman from the cold. He had not known that she owned the entire chain. He certainly had not known that one ordinary act in front of his daughter would humble a powerful chief executive, end the career of a man who measured people by their coats, and reshaped the way an entire hospitality empire treated the elderly, the sick, and the simply unlucky. He did not know any of it as he walked out into the morning, his daughter's hand small and warm in his own. He only knew that Matilda had asked him a question in a lobby full of strangers, and he had answered her not in words, but with the choice he had made it in front of her eyes.